pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the
to the flag of the United
United
States of America, to
to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
President Daly,
here.
Vice President Headland,
Here.
Trustee Clements,
Probably on our way.
Trustee McNall,
Here.
Trustee Parr.
Here.
Thank you for joining us. This is a special meeting added a little bit last minute to discuss the budget. We're coming from our budget webinar that Dr. Benante just led us through at 7 o'clock. And here we are to keep talking about the budget. Our next school board meeting is Tuesday, April 6th, which will be after spring break in the auditorium. And a reminder that we have 2 seats up for election on the Board of Education. If anybody's interested in running for those seats, they need to fill out a petition packet, and they can get that packet from Miss Catherine Platt, our district clerk, by emailing her at cplatt@haldaneschool.org, or you can stop into the district office and pick an application, a petition up. And if anybody's interested in learning more about what we do, if you're thinking about running, if you want to pick any of our brains, we're all very happy to talk to you about what we do and answer any questions you may have. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Benante for his comments.
Jen, I don't have much to say. I think having just spoken for the last 40 minutes, I don't want to be repetitive, but I just will share with the board that over the last 2 weeks, we have, Ann and I continue to work with budget development, and really are more encouraged to think that the remaining deficit that we anticipate can be offset by additional state aid. It won't cover it all, but we do think part of it will be, as well as we won't present this tonight, but the next time as part of the administration's recommended budget, the use of reserve funds, a particular strategy will apply in further offsetting the remaining deficit, excuse me, yes, gap, in preparation for next year's budget. So with those things in mind, I think we've really limited the potential areas of reduction to what was most of what was discussed in our first meeting, an elementary teaching section, part of a special education position that had been unfilled, a combination of aid and teaching assistant assignments, which were, as we further drill into that, because I know that was of interest to the board, are mostly connected to students who are graduating and just not seeing the need to refill those positions based on that, as well as the consolidation of the human resource line, or that we had anticipated as a human resource line, which is mostly maintenance, operation, transportation related positions and or stipends right now. So whichever way you want to look at that, but consolidating that and aligning though administratively, which I think is unfortunately getting conflated a little bit in this, but and I accept responsibility for that, but those responsibilities in HR to the director of curriculum position, just from an organizational perspective, I think that'll be better for us. So really limiting it to those things in addition to the immediate areas that we had discussed. I think all things considered, with the significance of the budget deficit and the levy limit being, at a place, where, I've recommended that we didn't want to challenge that in any way. I think we've arrived at a place where the district will continue to run efficiently and still maintain a very high standard for excellence and is prepared to going into next school year. Other than that, I think, I'm here to listen. Obviously, if the board has any further discussion, I have the slide decks up so I can pull in anything if you want me to go back and reference anything that was shared tonight or that has been shared in previous presentations. I have that here, and I'll share my screen. And I know also we have some community members who may wish to speak. So we'll just follow the regular meeting process for that. And I will just say, if any community members, as we prepare for public comment, Jen, I know I don't mean to interject, but just a Zoom thing. If you could use the raise your hand feature, we will then make you a panelist, so we'll actually be able to see you. And you can say whatever you wish to say during public comment under the parameters that Jen will share when the time comes.
And the time is here. We
Okay.
are at public comment time.
Can I ask if I have questions or comments or?
We're going to have board discussion after
Fantastic.
the comment section.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
So just to remind those of us who are joining our board meeting of our communication from the public rules, the Haldane Board of Education desires and values input from the entire school community. For those who wish to address the board, as Dr. Benante said, please do a raise your hand feature and you will be promoted to panelist so that you can speak. Please state your name for the record. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Disparaging remarks and discussion of district personnel are prohibited. Although we do not engage in dialogue, we're listening. So that means there won't be a lot of back and forth questions being asked and answers provided. It's more of an opportunity for you to share your thoughts or comments with us, and we listen. And if we need to follow up with you from a board president perspective or a superintendent perspective, we will do so. So is there any communication from the public at this time? There will be another opportunity later in the meeting as well.
I see two. So with that, we'll start with Judy Farrell. So Judy, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Oh, there you are. Hi,
Good
Judy.
evening. Hi, thank you. I'm sorry you missed the earlier meeting, but do you anticipate any revenue coming from the American Rescue Plan? Since there's so much funding coming to New York State from that federal source.
Sure, Judy, I'll answer that real quick. We believe we're scheduled to receive or have an allocation of $180,000 that we can access. It's still unclear. Two things are still unclear: how those funds will be restricted or what they'll be designated for. So which may not line up with what we see as our needs. And the quick example I give of that is that it seems to be becoming well known that those funds may be partially restricted for learning loss. But how that learning loss is defined is something that may not necessarily be something above and beyond what we typically have here at Haldane, especially considering we were largely open through the pandemic, unlike other school districts, which went through more extended periods of closure. So the regulations that are associated with those funds have not been released yet. And the application for those funds has not been released yet. So we see a designation through Senator Schumer's office, but we're not still clear on how to access it.
And Dr. Benante, it's also just a one-time funding as we understand it currently, right? So
Correct.
It's kind of a one-time thing, not an ongoing.
No, it seems to be structured very similarly to Race to the Top, where there's a window that districts will be able to access it that may indeed be multi-year, but it's one time. So it's one pot of money to be used and accessed either in 1 year or potentially up to 3 years or over the course of 3 years. So that's again, these are just what we're picking up in how the what's being reported about the funds.
Sure.
We
Yes.
actually haven't received anything from the federal government or from New York State, because the state will facilitate its distribution yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Nice to see you.
Thanks for all you do. You too.
Thank you. And then also I have here Jen, Ms. Lagerman would also like to. So Teresa, I'm gonna promote you. You should join us. Hi, Teresa.
Well, it actually,
Oh,
I'm sorry. It always
You're not
says,
Teresa.
I have to change the name there. Sorry, guys. So this is Brent Lagerman. Hello, how are you all? My question was around the, obviously you guys are doing a great job, and there's like a really hard thing to do here, reducing the budget. Obviously you don't want to cut anything, but I did notice that there's a lot of TAs and also that special ed position that were cut. And Dr. Benante in the last call mentioned that the reasoning for that, but also mentioned that it was determined that that was okay. And my question is, how did you guys figure out that that is going to be okay? Do you feel like there's not going to be a lot more stress put on the teachers not having these aides that they're used to having, and also having one less person in the special ed? Is there going to be less special ed kids, or is it just seem like you have enough with what is there?
No, thanks, Brent. I'm happy to elaborate. So when we look at those TAs and aid roles, we look at who are they currently assigned to and what capacity are they currently serving us. So I asked each of our principals just for a description of that. And as an example, one of our TAs is being used exclusively to cover a class for a teacher who's currently working remotely. So we're in that kind of unique situation there this year where some of our teachers are working remotely. So they're zooming into the class that's here at Haldane, and we have a TA in the class just helping facilitate the distribution of materials at the teacher's direction. Well, we expect that teacher to be back, if not this year, certainly by the start of next year, which is no longer going to necessitate the need for a teaching assistant to be in that classroom. It's really just done as a matter of need for facilitation. That's not a TA who would normally, under regular circumstances, would be in that classroom anyway. So that's an example of one of the TAs that we see, or positions that we see that we can reduce. And I just want to make note, back at the beginning of the school year, we were expanding some of the part-time aides, some of the part-time TA support, just in anticipation of these. So we're going back and now looking ahead to next year and saying, well, we won't need as much, given that we should be back in some sort of regular school mode. Two of the aides that reduction that I mentioned are attached to students who are graduating. So those students will move on, and we do not anticipate, or we've accounted for students who are coming into the system or who are already in the system, and we're projecting needing aid support. So we see variability in that every year. I think that's just part of the process of reviewing student needs. And we'll have some students who have aides assigned to them who will move on. And we'll have students who, come in and we may be adding aides some years based on that. But at least looking out to next year, we feel that, we can make a reduction in those aid assignments. And that obviously helps us offset the deficit. So there will be ebbs and flows to the aides and the TAs specifically, because especially the aides, because they're largely based on student program need. And we're just in one of those particular situations or times where we're likely to need less aid support than we have needed in the previous year.
Great. And the special ed reduction, does that also?
Oh, yes, thank you, Brent, for reminding me. So we had an individual resign their position. They accepted another position in another district, and we haven't filled that position. There hasn't been a need to. And then just looking out into next school year, we still don't see as of today a need to fill that position. I will say, and Jen commented on this, this is the most, special ed is one of the more difficult areas to budget around with any sense of certainty at this time of the year, because the annual review process starts in February and runs through June. And then there's also the potential for students to be identified through the summer months as well. So we're largely operating from projections. I think we're pretty good at that, but I always, I try to always, state the appropriate caveats that nothing's set in stone. There could be needs that come up or students who move into the district or who are identified between now and then. And if there are, we'll make sure they have the appropriate space. I think the most important thing, from a budgeting perspective is we see this position right now. We don't anticipate based on our projections that we're going to need to fill it. However, if there's a need, we're going to make sure that our students have the supports in place that are needed. And that very well may require an add back in, and then we just have to look to something else, to offset that cost, later on. And that happens. I think it's happened, once or twice since I've been here. It's probably happened in years past. I'd be surprised if it didn't. But we don't want to misconvey that we're trying to, fit a program to, our budget. Quite frankly, in the one area that are in special ed in particular, the student needs largely dictate, the extent of what our cost is. And these are mandated services, so we don't have the option to determine what, whether we're going to provide these services or not. But I do think right now that 0.6 of that position is as of today does not appear to be necessary for next school year.
Great. Keep up the great work, guys. I know it's not easy to make cuts. So.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so is there any other communication from the public at this time? There'll be another chance. So we're going to go into our board discussion. So this is our opportunity to ask any questions that we still have for Dr. Benante, make any comments. And Dr. Benante, if you need anything specific from us, you'll let us know. But maybe we can just open it up. We were all at the previous webinar. So if anybody has any questions or comments.
I have a question and a comment. Thank you for providing incremental information on the aides and TAs. I think that's super useful. I think it drives visibility to the process and what's going on. So that's super useful for us and super useful for the community, I think, as well. I did have a question on the revenue slide, and I didn't think to ask this last time. I didn't even notice it. But on the 250 that you're projecting coming from reserves in revenue, and I know that there's another reserve conversation that I'm eagerly anticipating. It should be interesting. But what's that current 250? Is that coming
John,
up?
do you mind if I just pull up the slide just so we're
Go
all
right ahead. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
Oop, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. So you're looking at this figure right here?
Yep. Yeah.
And can you elaborate on it?
Sure, that 250,000 is from the retirement reserve that we had in there last year. We did not need to use it, so it was fine to put it in there again, because that's something that that is earmarked for, and it's not using the entire reserve.
Is that okay? So is that we have a I'm not going to get the language right? We have a dedicated reserve for retirement. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just in the last couple of years, they added the TRS expenditures in that reserve.
Right.
At first, it was strictly for ERS expenditures, and then there's a sub-account now for TRS. So that can be put towards the expenditures for either one. Okay.
And so does this in here mean that we are going to be pulling from our currently designated retirement reserves to fund those retirement costs in 2021, 2022, or does it mean something else?
That's what it means, that if we need to go into reserves, that's the reserve we'll be pulling from, is the retirement reserve. And that 250,000 is just a percentage of the expense, for TRS and ERS combined. It's about $1.5 million, what's in the budget for those retirement expenditures.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna recap and tell me if I get this right. Over the years, we have been able to, at the end of our calendar year, when we have balances in excess of expenses, we transfer some of those balances into a number of reserves that are designated for a particular use. One of those is a pot of money to be used for retirement costs. Next year, we are anticipating that there will be a big chunk of retirement costs, which we have every year. And so next year, we're going to say, we're actually going to draw down some of that pot of saving retirement cost savings and put those into the budget and use those so we do not have to raise the tax levy as high.
That's correct.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you.
And then the follow-up. to
Thanks,
that-
John. That was actually, I like that recap.
Thank
That's good.
you.
And then the final part of that, right, would be if we, again, this year had surplus and we had excess fund balance at the end of the year, which we expect to, and has said we can anticipate that, we could replenish the retirement reserve that we are currently talking about pulling from for this budget.
That's correct.
And are there any long-term effects of doing this?
Right now, we have a healthy reserve in that section, in the retirement reserve. And there's enough too that, you know, in the time when the last year with what happened with the economy, over the next few years, it's possible that the retirement rates could go up. So that differential, this reserve would help with that, with the tax cap levy limit and that calculation. If the retirement percentages go up over 2%, there's part of the formula where we can increase the tax levy to cover that. But even a 2% increase on the two retirement systems could put us into, you know, a bigger deficit like is happening this year. But we have about 560,000 plus in that reserve. So so we're good there to put that in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That clarifies a lot for me too.
I have a thought, a question after the presentation. Can I go ahead?
Please.
So I totally get the rationale for combining the administrative positions, the curriculum and instruction position. I totally understand the economic rationale for combining the curriculum and instruction administrative position and the HR administrative position in this year. And I think since we talked about and considered adding the administrative position for HR, definitely a part of that role was going to be devoted to making sure, not necessarily focusing on teachers' professional development, but really making sure that appropriate trainings are taking place, and HR policies are being implemented and things like that, and all that I can actually really see how that could align with an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. Not that it was ever going to be an assistant for CNI, but that position. I guess the one thing, and I guess it's just possibly something that we have to live with, but some of the demand on our administrators related to HR feels to me like a really different skill set than the skill set for being a really good curriculum and instruction administrator. And so I don't have a question. I think I just want to make a point and have people disagree with me. Like, I understand the economic rationale. I totally get it. But I do think it could be tricky to find somebody that can do, and that's the thing that happens with our administrators all the time. People have to wear all these different hats, right? Like, and it's a challenge, but it does feel like two kind of different hats to me. And I wondered, Dr. Benante, if you had any response to that.
I think you're right. They are different skill sets. And I think you'll have candidates who profile really well for curriculum, and people who have background and expertise in that, through their graduate studies, or through their work experience, who really hone in on curriculum. And then you have individuals who go that pathway and who are really interested in human resource management, and they're two distinctly different but related, obviously, skill sets. And ideally, perfect scenarios, you have two really good people in each position, and they collaborate well, because there's obviously great opportunity in that. So I think in just examining smaller districts who've had to make a similar decision, they've combined them. Not everyone, but some have decided to, distinguish those roles differently. But there's several who have combined them, and it's gonna. You'll hear me say sometimes, when everybody's responsible for something, no one really is. And I think that's the current environment we're in, with HR in particular, and a little bit, not so much anymore with curriculum. It's been really helpful to have Judy. Hey, if we have to resolve to a shared position, I think it still puts us on a better ground next year than we're currently on. And it's not a criticism of Judy, but we just have to remember Judy's here part-time. So we don't have the benefit of having Judy here full-time. So I think by way of just having someone who's here full-time, distinct responsibilities, being in curriculum and in HR, it'll certainly help. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, considering the discussions we've had on both, as it relates to both positions or both needs over the past 3 years. Because even though we just started talking about formulating HR, I think we've talked about the needs for, at various times over the last few years. And I've heard from the board, that I'm not the first person to bring it up. So, I think we're making progress, and that's what's most important as it relates to the leadership in those two areas.
Do you have a vision for like what you think the breakdown would be? Like, is it like 60-40, 70-30? And I'm putting I'm personally prioritizing curriculum instruction as the bigger component. And if you don't know, then that's fine too. I just wondered if you had a thought about it.
Yeah, I don't, there's needs in each area. I think the good news is, Judy, through collaboration with our teacher leadership structure and our principals, has been helpful to get some work off the ground. So, whoever comes into this role will have to decide, as they're focusing on HR, where's the ball rolling, and there's momentum behind, and we can help with that, obviously. The good news about our leadership team, I don't think there's anyone averse to engaging around program, because everybody's used to having done it for so long. So that's good. So we're going to have to just continue to work together as a team to make sure that whoever that individual is has the space to focus on HR when they can, or when they need to, and then also has the space to work on curriculum when they need to. The HR stuff, as when there's an issue there, it demands everyone's immediate attention. So one, we all have to navigate that. We've lived that. You're familiar with those issues. I think, though, my focus for whoever this individual is will be on the HR end, is to look at the process and procedural things, like almost do an audit, and then map out what needs to be addressed, and some of that can just be addressed on their own time, in time they define to do it. Policy, is a good example. This person's going to have to go through our policy and really define what are those HR related policies that we want to make sure the practices are consistent with. It's a project, and they're going to have to navigate which projects are going to take precedence over the others, and between curriculum and between HR, and we'll support them with that. There is an option. One thing I want to mention, Peggy. There is an individual I found last year. COVID got in the way of this, but who can do? It's an HR professional, retiree, who can do an actual audit of your HR practices in your district. It's not very costly. person comes in and essentially works closely with payroll benefits, as well as looks at your policies, your state law required trainings, all of that, and kind of goes through and just, what's in place, what's at a sustaining level, and then where are the gaps. So I'm, entertaining just in the background, maybe we set that, whoever this person is, with that level of support so they don't have to do the audit themselves. Maybe we find at the beginning of next school year, we have some funding, we can commit to having someone independent do the audit. Maybe that's even best. And then maybe that helps that person out, get the HR stuff lifted off the ground. So those are just some things I'm thinking about in anticipation of having it as a split role.
No, that sounds good. I mean, that also, and again, it all, it represents the kinds of, like hard decisions. I don't want to say compromises, but the hard decisions that have to be made under circumstances like this.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the board? I know we've been living with this for a while.
It's, and maybe an opposite, I don't know if it's a question or comment. I know that I was pleased at the top of the meeting, Phil, that you were making that clear distinction about our intentions with the administrative restructuring at the elementary and middle school. And I did note that in our previous meeting, you had talked about, the necessity versus the perfect, again, talking about it might be more appropriate if you're going to do a restructuring like this to take a full year to determine the best way to execute that. I know in this last year, we've discovered that we are able to mobilize to attend to a crisis and really put something in place that makes sense. But I was just curious to know, I would imagine the interim involved in that restructuring is going to be sort of reexamination of the current administrative staff, and then opening and posting for our new director of athletics, who is also going to be providing that support. So it seems like we're going to be trying to accomplish quite a bit in a short period of time. And I'm just curious, since we've had this last year, even though this was an irregular year in our search for our director of athletics, I know that sometimes filling these positions can be a little more complicated than we would hope. So I'm curious to know when that process might begin. Should we decide to move forward in that direction, if you feel like you have the capacity to?
Sure. And you're speaking specifically to the middle school.
I'm just talking about that restructuring, and I know I was also pleased to hear that, or it was surprised to me, and it shouldn't have been, that we have gone back and forth, so this will not be an unfamiliar structure to the school. So there is some history in one way or another with. So I know that we can look to previous models to help us figure out what.
Yeah, I as I look at our enrollment study, I do think we have to ask the question that, is the current structure at the middle level, and I'll even include, middle level really spans 5th grade through 8th grade. And I think just anecdotally, we may not see the numbers in each cohort to really justify the teaming structure that's currently in place at grades 6, 7, and 8. So the numbers in and of themselves may necessitate a re-examination of how we are teamed, because we just won't have enough students to have viable classroom set up the way we currently do in some of these cohorts. So at that time, in anticipation of that, likely will also be, should we also ask ourselves the question around how our middle school model, and whether our current middle school model administratively through the instructional teaming approach is best structured or designed to meet the needs of the students who we have or anticipating have come up into it. So we're not there yet, but in 2 years, we likely will be. So as far as a timeline, I would say the year prior to that, because I think a year is a good enough amount of time to explore those questions, to work collaboratively with your staff and with your families, and to an extent with the kids, on redefining, if you want to do that. And I'm not of the mindset the question necessitates, asking the question necessitates redefining anything, as much as we should just ask ourselves this question and create the space to examine it. So I think that's coming upon us in the next 2 years.
And that's because we have these cohorts coming up that are like 35, 36
Correct.
kids. So if you have this grade level teaming structure, you're talking about English sections with let's, 7 kids and 7
Correct.
no, let's say 9 kids in there.
Yeah,
This is fewer than 10.
Yep.
We're talking about having these classes that are just absolutely tiny. Yeah. I don't think that if that hadn't occurred to me until just this conversation,
Yeah.
that's what we're facing.
So it's not real viable. And I think, Peggy, we've talked about this, but there's a sweet spot for class size, and having too few having 9 may sound great, but
6 isn't it.
it's not it. Yeah. So, we want to honor that, but there may be some opportunity that comes with that to really re-envision our approach. And we have some great teachers, across those grade level spans who I'd really be encouraged to hear their thoughts about how we can maybe re-enter into a real supportive middle level model. But, that obviously acknowledges, that the current model may not quite meet the needs of our kids or our teachers for that matter. I don't think, having so few students in a class is really good for our teachers either. So we'll look to create the space to have those conversations then. But who knows? Maybe we see this influx of families over the next couple of years, and that changes. But we should anticipate that.
So if there's not any other comments from the board, I'll open it back up to the community. Is there anybody that needs anything? Okay, let me open it back up to the community. Is there anybody in the community that would like to communicate with us? You can do so via the chat feature as the raise the hand feature as we did previously.
We have one, Jen.
All right.
All right. So Mr. Daisley, just give me a minute here. Mark, we see you. So if I think you just have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Very good. Thank you so much. I just wanted to, my name is Mark Daisley. I'm a parent and resident. I just wanted to thank everybody for all the time and effort they've put into this budget, as well as the transparency that they've offered to the community. I've been through, I think, the 2 presentations and found it extremely helpful. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to announce my intention to run for the board in the election coming up. And thank you for those of you who've spoken to me and shared your insight. And I really look forward to running next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daisley.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, any other communication from the public? Any board reflections? Dr. Benante, any final thoughts?
I'd like to say something profound, but I I don't have anything left. No, I think just between now and the 6th, I guess more so this week than next week, if there are any further thoughts or direction that the board would like to provide the administration, please, sooner rather than later would be great. As just we work on the final details related to a budget to present to you on the 6th. We would just want that time to incorporate into our work next week as we put that information together. I appreciate your time tonight and the time you've given to our community partner meetings and to the community forum this evening. I know it was an ambitious timeline for pulling some of these meetings together from where we were a few weeks ago, but again, all of this is to help us message and put us in a position to communicate the budget and its related details to the community and elicit ideally that support come May. So thank you for that, and nothing further, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. So this is our last public meeting before, this is our last meeting before April 6th. So if anybody has any further questions, thoughts, concerns, it should be relayed to Dr. Benante via email for him to take into consideration before his presentation. Okay, well, with that, I would like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ann. Thank you, Dr. Benante.
Thank you.
Bye.